I am, in actual fact.
Lovely. We love a good trade union movement on this show. Okay, what we're going to do. Oh, hang on. We're muted, Paul, apparently. Okay, apparently we've been muted. I'm so sorry about that. The technical glitches always happen. They're always here for us, but for everybody who's here, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a special show for dedicated to Autism Awareness Week. This week is Autism Awareness Week, and of course, we want to mark that with a special show. We've got some amazing people with us tonight, and I can't wait to hear from them and hear about all the exciting things they've been doing. So we'll go around the room again for those who didn't hear the first time around. First of all, we have Sib Ali with us. Hello, Sib.
Hello.
Hello. And we also have Heidi Smith. For those of you who follow our shows, this will not be the first time that you've seen the wonderful Heidi. Hello, Heidi. Thanks for joining us again.
Hello.
And then we have Austin Harney here with us as well. Austin, it's an absolute pleasure. I've heard wonderful things and I'm excited to hear what you've been up to.
Hello. I'm grateful.
Lovely. Yeah, so thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I know we have what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it really relaxed, talk about a few things that you guys have been up to, and then we'll see if we get anything interesting in the chat, and we'll have a little conversation around autism, around important things that you feel people need to know, and hopefully we will educate some people and inform some and entertain as well, because that's what we're here for. I'd like to start by coming to you, Sib, first of all. I was recently made aware that you have made a feature film about living with autism, and I'm so excited. I have to confess, I haven't seen it yet, but I have watched all of the teaser trailers, and I certainly will be watching it. I'm really excited about it. Can you tell us a little bit about this film, why you decided to make it, and what you're hoping to get out of it?
Okay. First of all, we need to start off by going back to 2016, where I developed the concept of for the film's idea, because I did some test shoots with my GoPro strapped to my chest, literally. So I was literally walking around town or city with a GoPro strapped to my chest because I wanted to see if I could get the right feel for how to tell this story, because I wasn't sure how I could tell the story in the beginning. But then after some test shoots with a GoPro strapped to my chest, I quickly realized, even though it's a great way of telling a story, it wasn't the most stable because it was always shaky. Because, of course, what I didn't realize was when I was walking around town or the city with a GoPro strapped to my chest, it was always wobbling and such. So it was really hard to get a steady shot with it. So after trying and not succeeding with that idea, I quickly got a basic script together, got some extra cameras like a DSLR camera, and asking a camera person to film me, we got started. First, we start off in Birmingham, where I talk about what city life is like for people with disabilities, because there are particular points of contention in Birmingham that I've experienced, such as the train station can overwhelm me with sensory overload because there's this great echo everywhere you go. And so it can be hard for me to concentrate on where I want to go next, for example, because if you're overwhelmed with lots of noise, you can't think and you can't make decisions very well, or you can't even go into an area sometimes. Of course, that's not the only thing. The next thing we came across that was crazy is the tram crossing was so poorly designed that we both nearly got run over during filming. And that's what you'll see in the main film. It's absolutely scary to think that a redeveloped city, because of the redevelopment of the Grand Central Station and other areas, you would think they would have accounted for disabled people when they designed that tram crossing. But it's clear to me they hadn't. And so after we recovered psychologically from being almost run over by a tram, for instance, due to the crossing, we moved around the city centre to see what else we could learn about the situation for people like me. And it turned out we had to face cyclists who were riding towards us really quickly without looking where they were going. So if you're walking as a disabled person, or you have limited vision, for example, you could get hit by these cyclists because they're supposed to use designated cycle lanes, but I didn't see any designated cycle lanes in that part of Birmingham at the time. So I thought, this is an accident waiting to happen. I mean, I like Birmingham because it looks very nice, sure, but it's not really accessible. So after we finished our adventures in Birmingham, we went to Salford because I was invited to a disability conference where I was talking on stage for about a minute or so, because I was trying to highlight these very issues I raised in Birmingham towards the audience to see if they had seen such things or could understand where I was coming from. And soon enough, they understood it. And it wasn't just, and it was shocking for me to see that it wasn't just me that was experiencing the issues, but people from other countries who came to this conference were expressing similar things, because one of the speakers on stage was from Ecuador, and the state of that pavement I saw in Ecuador, oh my goodness, it was so bad. I don't know how to describe it, because the pavement was crumbling right in front of you. And sometimes there were no wheelchair ramps. So if you were a person in a wheelchair, for example, how could you get inside the building or up the stairs? There were no stair lifts at that time from the video I saw. And the pavement was sometimes on the same level as the road. So if you were autistic and experienced sensory overload, or somebody with limited vision, for example, like a partially sighted person, what would happen is you won't know where the pavement starts and where the pavement ends. So this puts you at risk of getting run over potentially, which is quite dangerous. So we had very interesting exchanges and raised a lot of awareness through my short speech, which was great, and learning about people from other countries and what the disability picture looks like for them. And so after we went to Salford, I went to Crewe to see my good friend Adam, because I thought, I haven't seen him in a while, so let's catch up. But along the way, we came across some pretty unexpected situations, one of which a police officer stops us in the train station because he noticed my tall friend filming me. But at first I thought I was going to be arrested for making an awareness film. But this was far from the truth. I later found out that he wanted to be in the film himself. And we had quite an interesting exchange on camera with the police officer and myself. And then we had some reaction shots afterwards where my friend was asking me how I felt about the exchange with the police, because it raised some interesting points. Because although I couldn't say too much about it in the film back then, because I didn't really understand it back then, this is a perfect example of how a police encounter as somebody with autism could quickly turn ugly had I not responded to it with good humor and a little basic understanding. Because never in my life have I been stopped by police before. So that was truly surprising and a little bit scary, I have to admit. That was the first time I was stopped by police in my life in the UK. And then I hear stories about people who get stopped by police like, I don't know, 10 times a day or 20 times a day. And I'm thinking, how is that possible? Because it didn't match with the experience I lived with. So compared to those people, I'm pretty damn lucky. And I probably am.
It's so interesting, Sib. I mean, I think the issues that you raised, it does sort of, it seems to me like it is about raising awareness. I think a lot of people walk around, like you say, in Birmingham with the tram crossing. Clearly that has been designed without disabilities in mind at all. I've seen the clip of it, and I'd struggled to fit through there. So it's the film something for you that what sparked your decision to make it? Were you experiencing things like that and thought, right, I need to raise awareness about this?
This is a good story, and I'll tell you. Let's go back to 2015, where I first experienced difficulties finding work and trying to get my voice heard in wider society. Because these were two issues that combined together as a formidable barrier that I had to face back in 2015. So I was thinking, how can I get out of this situation? Or rather, how can I change the situation? Because you need to have a good attitude to change things as well. Because there are two kinds of people in this world: people who complain about barriers they face, and people who do something about the barriers they face. Guess which camp I'm in?
I wonder. Absolutely. That's just
Okay.
incredible.
So after a lot of thinking and developing ideas, the funny thing is this idea came to me during some work experience at a TV company when I was asked to do office admin tasks like transcoding video, cataloging equipment, and doing various other tasks in the TV company. That was in 2015. And so I thought somehow I could develop the basics of this film at the same time as doing my work experience for the week in TV. That's just nothing short of remarkable.
It's really remarkable. I'm so pleased you've made it. I think if we can get more things like this, more things to bring it to people's attention, because I think I want to have faith in humanity and think that honestly, if people are educated about the issues and educated enough to put themselves in other people's shoes, that things can change and it'll become completely normal to not. We were asking on Tuesday night show whether we should change our ways for people with autism, or whether people with autism should change for us. And it was like, well, clearly people with autism shouldn't be changing for other people. We should be inclusive and bear these things in mind. So I think it's really essential that you're doing things like this, and we will absolutely share the link. What's the name of the film, Sib?
It's called My Life on Camera because I want to document the situations I experience as somebody with autism, because I thought it was high time somebody made a film that reflected real life situations or real world scenarios. Because at that time in 2015, I was watching some films on the BBC. Now, as much as I have my own mixed feelings about the BBC due to films they made at that time, they were showing films that hardly reflected the reality many people with autism face, for example, because the stereotype I saw in 2015 was a white guy or a white kid, okay, who was really good at maths and was shy, okay? Now, I am autistic and I don't fit any of the stereotypes they often showed on TV at the time. Why? Because I'm from an ethnic minority, first of all. Secondly, I'm very confident, the total opposite of a typical autistic person depicted on films and TV at the time. And finally, I wasn't good at maths. I only got a grade D at first, so I had to resit it, and then I got a grade C at the end of it.
Brilliant. You're absolutely right. There's no reason or people with autism are not as diverse as everybody else. So yeah, that's brilliant. So My Life on Camera, we are going to be sharing the links for that in our chat. Keep an eye out for it. Do go and have a look at it, please. Do watch it and share it with all of your friends. Thanks for that, Sib. We'll come back to you after we've done the rounds. Heidi, I'd like to come to you next. I know for a fact that you're involved in something that, for me, I see the hard work you put in and the countless hours of work you put in, and you never take any credit for it. I'm really excited. Can you tell people a little bit about is it a charity or is it a company that you started?
I think as much as I know I sound like I'm just saying it, but it is a team effort. It isn't just me, but I'm very proud of it. And at the moment, we're a constituted community group. We have been looking to get charity status, but I think we did start everything just before COVID, and then when COVID happened, we got so busy finding activities for our families to do, and obviously being busy with our own families, that we just put it on the back burner. So now that is something that we really need to do, because we're another year down the line, and it's something else to tick off. But I think what I absolutely love about the sensory place is it's about community, and it's about improving the quality of life, not just for that disabled child, but also for the families, because as any parent knows, if your child's upset, you're upset, and vice versa. And I think it's about taking those families out of their isolation, because a lot of them just stay behind closed doors, and they just keep to themselves, because they know when they go to a park that they're going to be stared at. They know when especially as the children start to get bigger, things like soft plays are no longer acceptable to take your child to. I know I've taken my little boy to the park, and I've had parents come up to me and say that he's blocking the slide. He isn't bothering anybody, he's just sitting and watching children go down the slide. But as he gets bigger, he's more noticeable, and some parents are a bit confused about that. Children tend to be fantastic, but unfortunately it tends to be parents that can be a bit wary and a bit unkind. So I think it's just kind of about removing those barriers for those families, and helping each other, because a lot of what they do is amongst themselves. They'll be on the page giving each other advice and speaking to one another, and you can see in the groups they make friendships and they get to know each other. And that is so important, to be able to have somebody to message and say, I've hardly slept, I've had a rubbish day. People who understand what it's like to, possibly have a teenager that's in nappies, or have a child that gets so upset that words are no longer a useful tool, so then they need visual aids to help them express what's going on. And to say that to anybody else, and I don't think it's anybody's fault, but I think with friends who have neurotypical children, they maybe don't know how to respond to that. And I think they try and be really positive and say, but you're doing so well. And sometimes what you need somebody to say is, it's really a bit shit, isn't it? It's not your fault, but it's rubbish. And that is just, there isn't anything that you can say sometimes. But I think what I love about the group is it's definitely a community, and it's all about the children and based around what they want to do. And the families have kind of guided it. So we've put on an event, and then the ones that have been really popular have been the ones that we've repeated. So they love a lot of the outdoor stuff, like the forest schools and the water sports and things at the beach, and very sensory type packs. So this half term we've had bubble packs, we've had pizza making, we've had art packs with finger paints, and we're going to have some baking bags next week, and forest schools and rafted canoeing and all sorts. And it's just lovely to see all the families together and having a good time. So yes, I absolutely love it.
Oh, it's so lovely, and I've seen all the little packs you've put together for the families, and it's really incredible, and I bet so welcome from the families you work with. Have you had any feedback from the families that you work with yet?
Oh yes, they're lovely. As soon as their kids have done them, most of them will send us a picture or they'll write a comment. So we have seen quite a lot of pictures, and the kids have really enjoyed it. And that's my favourite part, is when we get that feedback, to see the difference that it's making for these families.
So lovely. So what, how long have you been going for, and what was it that initially sort of started the passion to do it? Why did you do this in the first place?
Well, I love statistics because I think they shock people. So I'm going to reel off a few statistics that might help raise a bit of awareness around what the issues are for families. So if you are autistic, you are likely to die 17 years earlier than the rest of the population. 70% of people with autism also have some form of learning disability. And in a day, there is 3 deaths that are preventable in people with learning disabilities. So that's current British statistics, that's what it says. So for me personally, when the sensory play started, it was a group of parents who had children with all different disabilities, all different abilities. Sorry, the dog's just trying to see what's going on. Who wanted to come together and create something accessible that all of the children and families could come into. For myself personally, I really wanted to have somewhere that I could take Isaac, but also that I could build on his skills and I could acclimatise him to certain environments. So even things like going to the shop took us a long time, and it took repeated trips to the shop just to get him to understand that you have to go in and you pick something up and you wait in the queue and you pay for it. He still doesn't understand money, but he understands that a transaction is needed before he can just leave the shop. And those are all really, really small things, but it took us a long time. Obviously with COVID, I think what a lot of families are finding is that their children have regressed in the skills that they'd previously learned. And I think for me personally, even more so in things like healthcare, dental, because unfortunately with how stretched the NHS is, they do acclimatisation appointments, but they're very few and far between. So by the time the next acclimatisation appointment comes up, the children have completely forgotten what it was that they did there, or they remember some of it, but it brings back such fear that you can't get near them. And then what's happening is, unfortunately, because these children aren't getting the correct medical care and dental care, they're having lifelong problems. They're having very poor dental care, they're having teeth removed, multiple teeth at a time, because unfortunately they haven't been taken care of. And it is awful things to think about, but I think this is what people need to realize is happening, because that's the only way change is going to happen. So it's massive things like at the moment there's a lot of families who are being shoehorned into mainstream school when really their children can't cope in mainstream school. They're being bullied, or if they're not, because they're a quiet child that doesn't really bother anybody, their mental health is suffering because they feel like a failure because they can't keep up in school. So then that then leads to mental health problems on top of disability. And it's kind of just all spirals. So I think for me, the sensory place was about creating a community, giving people a safe space to say, I'm struggling with this, and being proactive and finding solutions for it. We haven't found them all. Obviously at the moment it's mostly been kind of recreational and survival techniques because of the pandemic, but I hope that we can branch out into a lot more and support families, not just with the recreational, but also with healthcare, with dental care, with mental health, with physical health, because physical health is a huge problem as well, because a lot of these children have hypermobility, or because they like specific things, it's very difficult to get them to exercise or to move, because if they have hypermobility, when they're moving, their muscles start to hurt and the joints start to hurt. So it's just, there's a lot of different challenges for families, and I could go on and on and on, but I think the sensory place is about bringing those families together and trying to figure out together what the problems are and what we're going to do about it.
That's just incredible. And I mean, have you given any thought to these challenges that you've explained? Mm-hmm. As somebody who like my kids, I don't even know the correct terminology. You kind of call them, what is it, neurotypical.
Yes.
it feels a bit odd to go, well,
Yeah.
my child is typical. It feels like I'm saying something wrong with your child. There's not. They're just diverse. They're just different. But I don't have those challenges, so I, as a parent, wouldn't. I mean, I do understand them because I know you, and I know a lot of my friends have children with autism or ADHD or what have you. So have you given any thought to doing something around education on teaching parents that, yeah, okay, your child doesn't have these issues, but these are the issues that other children face, so that you get a society that's a little bit more understanding when you see that child kicking off in a shop, and you don't, not to roll your eyes and shake your head because it's just it's normal. Have you given any thought to doing anything like that?
Well, I think as I kind of said before, I think children tend to be very accepting. But I think for parents, unfortunately, I mean, most people now know somebody with autism, but it's that age-old saying of, you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person, because it is a massive spectrum and everybody is so different. And I think, I don't mind personally if anybody ever stops to ask me a question about Isaac. Obviously, I can only say what I see. I can't possibly speak and say that I know everything in the same way that Sib knows his own condition and he knows the things that he struggles with. I can only say what I think Isaac struggles with, which is a bit different. But I do think it would be brilliant to be able to educate people. But I think the main way that we're going to do that is to, instead of having separate communities, to have one community. But I think the only way we're going to get there is by breaking down the isolation for these families and doing things in a group so that they start to get used to it. And maybe one time they feel brave enough to go on their own because they know they've had positive experiences before. And I think just trying to get these families out there is the best education that we can possibly do or offer.
Absolutely. And lastly, what I want to touch upon is the Sensory Place has just won an award.
Yes, we're very proud of that. We won the Northern Echo Young Adult and Child Healthcare Award, which, the competition was so fierce and we really didn't expect it. But honestly, we were absolutely thrilled. I still can't really wrap my head around it, but I think it just shows what a community can do when it pulls together. And that is what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations for that, and well done on everything that you've been doing. I'm a huge fan of the Sensory Place. I follow it. You can follow them on Facebook. You can get involved that way, get in touch with them. If you do have that need, I'm sure Heidi would be more than willing to help, because she doesn't say no to people who need help ever. And Austin's made it back. Hello, Austin. We lost you for a little while there. Thank you so much for getting back.
Hello, Laura. Yeah, and sorry I didn't get a chance to hear your speech, Heidi, but I shall look forward to it. And it was a great speech from yourself, Sib, as well. So obviously you want me to start now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, first of all, good evening, everybody. I'm Austin Harney. I was diagnosed with autism since the age of 4. But I must say that now I'm a socialist and a trade unionist. And it's an honour and a privilege to speak at this socialist think tank event tonight. If I was just to enclose a few details about myself. Now, when I was diagnosed, I was told, my family were told by the top doctors in the world, the top child psychiatrists in the world, that I was not fit for mainstream society, that I would be taken away from mainstream education, which I was. In those days, they used to take them away from their parents up until the 60s, until they relaxed the law slightly. But I was taken away from mainstream education. I'm talking roughly 1972. I was put in an appalling special needs school as well. Well, they call them special schools, even worse terms than that. So what I'm saying was, it was quite dreadful in those days. I could give you a brief history of that, but that can wait another time. But what I'm saying is my family actually rebelled against that. And in the end, they struggled like mad to get me into mainstream education. I was also having to be monitored by the local authorities. So it was a constant battle. About 1978, when I was 11. I'm giving away my age. Was I? Yeah, I think that's right. I'm sorry to say. Anyway, what I'm saying is quite clearly is they did an ECG test, and in those days, ECG tests were appalling. They didn't just put a crown on your head with wires. They actually, what they used to do was they used to stick pins and needles in your head, glue them in and everything. Doesn't sound very charming. And you sit in a dark, lie on bed in a dark room for hours or looking inside your brain. And they told me for the first time that I was brain damaged by parents. That was not a term we use today, by the way, for autistic people, but that's the way it was in those days. It was absolutely dreadful. But a very good child psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Dora Black, she's still alive. She received the International Women's Day Award just last year. She was interviewed, but she had decided that I would stay in mainstream education, and that was a victory. And so I carried on till about the age of 18, then tried to find employment as well, which wasn't easy. I got a job in the civil service in 1991. And what basically happened was, because the Disabilities Discrimination Act wasn't around at the time and they had no reasonable adjustments, it was very difficult for me to learn new duties in the job, and therefore on probation I was dismissed. Now, you know, I went through every procedure, welfare, I got no support from the occupational health specialist, a doctor who actually said my autism would have been cured by now, words to that effect, and I was too stupid to do the job, or too thick, and my dismissal was confirmed. So I was getting no support from nobody. However, it was a group of local union reps in that office. It was labelled the hard left branch, no joke. They were also friends of Mark Swok, who is now the General Secretary of PCS Union. They stuck their neck out for me, and I won my job back. I appealed against dismissal. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't until 1995 that reasonable adjustments became law, but they weren't really put into practice much. And it wasn't until 2004, the Hewitt versus Motorola case, where a dismissal of an autistic person was declared unlawful. So, you know, it's been a long battle, I think, for autistic people at that time. However, I became very active in the trade union. I'm paying it all back. I'm doing lots of personal cases to this day, right up to employment tribunal level. I've even sat in employment tribunals representing members. I've got as far as the National Executive Committee. I've been on there for 2 years for PCS, the Group Executive Committee representing 10,000 members in the Ministry of Justice. I have been a TUC delegate. I have spoken on TV, believe it or not, at the Trades Union Congress. Also, the fact is I am now 4th year running. I'm on the TUC Disabled Workers Committee, and I've just been re-elected this year. So this is basically what I've achieved as an autistic person, being told by the top doctors in the world I wasn't fit for normal society, and I've proved them wrong. I also, believe it or not, I'm a long-serving member of the Labour Party and a socialist. I actually stood as a councillor back in 2005. Now, I didn't tell anybody I was autistic then at the time. I kept it a secret because that's the way it was. That was the prejudiced society that you lived in at the time as well. But I, in a Tory marginal, I didn't do too badly. I got over 1,500 votes. Didn't get elected, but that was a start. But I've become more ensconced with trade union duties. So I'm doing a lot of work representing disabled members, and now I'm promoting autism neurodiversity in my own trade union, PCS. And we're going to start promoting autism events, autistic members, neurodivergent members to speak more. We're going to try and set up our own conference. That's what we're working for, and we're going to try and promote it within the trade union movement. We want to tackle the low employment rate for autistic and neurodivergent people. So we're going to fight it as much as we can within the trade unions. And I think that's very, very important in itself. So just wanted to go on to my final point as a socialist, and how relevant is autism to socialism. Extremely relevant. Now, I can tell you for a fact, when the National Autistic Society was set up in 1962, it was only a charity for the wealthy families and middle-class families, autistic children. That's who they were supporting. They were not supporting autistic children of the working poor. And the way they were treated was appalling. It was very, very bad. There was no support in those days. Local authorities just didn't care less. If you were talking about the 60s, you were talking long before that film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was made. So there was a very brutal prejudice towards disabled people at that time. Also the fact, what I was going to mention as well, I mean, it's just appalling. We actually watched a program once back in 1990, my family and I, probably before many were born on this event, but it was quite depressing. They interviewed 5 autistic children. 4 of them were below the age of 8. Those 4 came from middle-class parents, but the 5th child was 18 years of age, and he lived in a council estate. He was from a working-class family. And what was so depressing was he was to leave home. He wasn't to leave home to go and seek his fortune or find or look for a job or anything like that. He was to leave home to go in a sheltered home for the rest of his life. That was very depressing. And that was the neglect of the autistic people of the working poor. That's something we have to do as socialists to ensure that these people and children get all the support they need, and to ensure that they're part of everyday life, like the rest of us, just like myself as well. I want to finally conclude, by the way, that in 1962, it was a lady by the name, her name was Sib Ali, and she set up an autistic school for children. And when she did the launch in London, she invited a number of celebrities. They all turned up in their perfunctory manner, just making their time, trying to promote this school, give it a high profile. But there was only one celebrity who spent time with the children, actually played with the children, and he rolled over the floor with them as well. And that celebrity had just struck gold. He was a member of a pop group called the Beatles. His name was John Lennon, a left-wing celebrity, may I say. So there you are. That's what socialism will do for autistic people, for autistic children. Shows that what we're prepared to do, that we're prepared to go the whole way. I want to say, again, an honour and privilege to speak at the Socialist Think Tank event tonight. I think let's go forward. And I want to say to all of you, solidarity, sisters and brothers.
Wow, Austin, dear me, that was so inspiring. I can only echo what Musa said in the chat. Really, really inspiring stuff. And I can't quite believe your experiences, you know, that's not something I've ever lived. So it's to see how far you've come and what you've done.
Yeah.
I guess what I take from what you've been saying is that people with autism have sort of been treated as other to society in the past, and I guess still are. Would you say that's one of the biggest things we need to tackle? Because it obviously it's a class issue here as well, that if you've got the money you'll be all right, and if you don't, like everybody else, if you're working class, you are going to struggle. So do you think that that's something we need to tackle to be more inclusive?
I definitely believe it, because if you were talking about the time when we had a Labour government, 1/5 the economy was nationalised back in the 60s. That was the time when the film, about Maiden Dagenham, when women were paid less than men. It was when the trade unions were very powerful, but it wasn't always powerful in the good sense of the word, because it was dominated by macho, white, able-bodied men. That was the culture at the time. So women were treated as second-class citizens in the trade union movement. But not only that, people from ethnic backgrounds the same, and also disabled people right up to the 80s. It was appalling how they were treated in the trade unions. So what I'm trying to embrace is a 21st century style socialism. And if one day that we do have a socialist government, we're not going to have a socialist government just for the white male macho working class culture of the 60s. It's going to be for all of us. Just while you touched on the subject of class, there are many other areas, untouched areas of autism as well. Gender. They always used to say autism was a male disorder. Men and boys were more likely to be autistic than girls and women. That is complete and utter rubbish. It's not true at all. Boys were always paid more attention than girls in families. That was the issue. There were some very severely autistic girls that I knew as well, some who couldn't even speak. But more attention was paid to boys. That was the problem in a male-dominated era. And the sad reality is that many women who weren't diagnosed with autism until later life were very vulnerable to harassment, even sexual harassment as well. I think that, again, is something we need to tackle as socialists for autistic women. And also ethnicity and LGBT. Ethnicity in a prejudiced society. I'm second generation Irish, and people used to say to me at school, "We know why you're Irish," because that was the time when everybody used to crack an Irish joke all the time. And it's still going on to this day. There's now Autism Brown, who's about to be deported to Jamaica at 21, who's autistic, and he's hardly lived in the country. and it's just appalling how he's been treated by the Home Office. So we have got a big fight on our hands. And lastly, on LGBT, where I share something in common with LGBT people, is that we always had to keep these secrets in the prejudiced society. We couldn't come out in the open about who we were, whether we were autistic, whether we were LGBT. I don't need to go and abbreviate what it stands for, we all know. But that was a very unhealthy experience. And of course, I'm glad that I can sit down with many of my LGBT comrades in the trade union, and we can share our experiences of the appalling prejudice that we faced and how we had to cover up for ourselves and keep everything a secret, which was terrible. I didn't come out in the open until 2013 at the Labour Representation Committee conference. I'll be very quick, sorry, Laura. And in 2014, I came out in the open at the TUC Workers' Conference. And then finally, the first time in my own trade union, 2016, I did it. Now, I've been speaking on the platform for years, doing public speaking, had the guts for all sorts of criticisms and arguments. I didn't have the guts to admit that I was autistic. That was the most painfully courageous thing I ever had to do, was to tell the audience that I was autistic. So that wasn't easy for me either. But I'll allow you both to come. I'll allow you to come back in, Laura.
It's just so interesting. I find that the intersectionality that runs between everyone who is considered not white, rich, male, to be really fascinating, because you're right. There's a lot of similarity between experiences of people who aren't deemed to be normal, you know, and I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. And also that you brought up the fact that you came out as autistic, as it were. I'm interested, Sib, from yourself, was telling people that you were autistic a big deal for yourself? Was it something that you thought about it being a big deal, or did it feel quite normal to talk about it, or has it taken you some time to talk about it?
I have to be honest, it took me some time to figure out the best way of talking about this, because all of my life, people and various peers at school, college, university always saw that I was different, but didn't understand why. So it took me quite a long time to come to terms with it myself. And I'm really glad that Austin has raised some interesting points about intersectionality. I hope I'm saying that right, because it's not just white guys who have autism. This is a disability that affects everybody, or anyone potentially, whether you're a woman, whether you're religious, non-religious, whether you're Asian, black, whatever. It can affect anybody. And it links back to my earlier point where I talked about stereotypes back in 2015 that I saw on television back then, which was a white kid who was good at maths and I wasn't, and he was shy and I was outgoing. So I think it's really important to raise the point of intersectionality, because without understanding what that concept means, people won't be able to come to terms with it, and they won't learn to accept different people or understand why what we're doing is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good answer there. Thank you, Sib.
Thank you.
I'm also interested, Heidi, in the reaction from people in this sort of idea of coming out. And also it's been mentioned a few times in the chat and just by Sib as well, about how autistic people in the media are portrayed as these wonderful, beautiful minds who can do anything, and they're so clever, and you know, the perfect example is Rain Man, who can, you know, count cards or what have you. But there are autistic people who do have genuine challenges, and I'm lucky enough to know your son Isaac, who is just such a sweetheart. But it's safe to say that Isaac does have additional needs. So how do you feel about the narrative of autistic people either being completely ignored or being praised as these geniuses? How do you feel that is a helpful narrative?
I think there's a very common idea that we know in the disability community, in that if your child is considered low functioning, like Isaac, he would be considered low functioning because he has a severe learning disability and he's non-verbal. So then people overlook his abilities, and actually when you look at the things that Isaac is able to do, he's absolutely amazing. He's very specific about what he likes. He's a little Houdini when it comes to water. He can place things in certain angles and he knows how it will make the water go, and that's what he enjoys. And like all of us, if you enjoy something, you're going to put all of your energy and passion into that. It's just that his is very, very specific. But then if you are a high functioning person who can speak and kind of appears more normal, if that's, you know, I really don't like that word, but appears to manage quite well, people overlook your struggles. So, you know, it is so difficult, and I think what I found in both instances is a complete lack of services. You know, all we're ever told about autism is how important early intervention is, but unfortunately it isn't there. It's expected that once the child gets to school, that's where all the intervention's going to come in. But if you look at how much teachers have to juggle to follow a curriculum, to be an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, a physiotherapist in some instances, and I mean, this is the jobs that parents do for their child, and that's overwhelming for a parent. But for a teacher who has a class, even if they have a small class of maybe 4, that's 4 lots of all of those things that they've got to manage. And I mean, that's a very, very small class. For these children that are being shoehorned into mainstream school, you're looking at a class of 15 to 20. And just so many children are slipping through the net, and a lot of people with autism have massive sensory issues, as Sib was saying. So it can be so challenging for them to be able to concentrate and to be able to keep up with everything, that it then starts to affect their mental health. So I think it's just there isn't a positive, there's no, and that sounds awful, there's so many positives in autistic people, there's so many amazing things that they can do, and that is definitely something that we need to look at. But I don't think it's a case of high functioning versus low functioning, which seems to be the narrative in the autism community for many, many years now. I think there is downsides on both sides, and I think that's something that we should just do away with. It is a spectrum, and children are completely different. And then adults are completely different. Sorry.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I think there is sort of a sense of people being labelled as one thing or another, and it's true of any, I guess, minority. I guess we're going back to that again, you know. We had Ray Goodspeed on not so long ago, doing one of our interviews. He famously helped start Lesbians and Gays Support the Minors. And he said for a long time he was defined by his gayness. That was what it made him. Have you found that that the people generally tend to be defined by their autism? Like you said, you know, autistic people are like everybody else. They have talents and they have problems. We are all the same. We have talents and not so good things that we can do. But that's true of everybody. So it's unacceptable then for us to just define people by their autism. Austin, I'm keen to hear, have you experienced that in your lifetime, that you are defined by having autism rather than a trade unionist or a socialist or a fantastic public speaker?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, because you see, the problem with me was I had to hide my autism. That was the way I was brought up. It was terrible, really. It was very brutal. And I even went to a mainstream boarding school. No, it wasn't a special one. It was terrible. It was like a trial and error for me. I wouldn't wish that on anybody's autistic child. But we talk about language and we say normal is not, and high functioning, or what words we use. What I was called was absolutely unbelievable, really. It was absolutely dreadful. I won't go into the details because I think you've got some idea of possibly what I'm talking about. And it was even said to me once, you know, well, even a PE instructor, sorry, I won't say the name of that person's occupation because this is public, but it was said to me, are you born stupid or are you here to take lessons? You know, why do you walk into the classroom looking so bloody formless? That was the phrases they used. I was even told in the old days, not outside school as well, you know, shape up or you'll end up in the funny farm. That's where you'll be for the rest of your life. You know, you've got to be part of normal society and all the rest now. So this is not acceptable. And the terms autism wasn't really used in my day until the film The Rain Man was released. It was just, I was called thick or brain damaged, really. So the autism was more of a medical term, you know, a pompous medical term that people would use in everyday life. It was like technical jargon in those days. And autism had to be a very severe definition because that was before Asperger's syndrome was recognized in 1994. Now, I was well into my 20s at the time, but I'm just saying, with the strict definition of autism, it was a brutal diagnosis. I was actually diagnosed as quasi-autistic. So that means if I was fully autistic, I wouldn't be able to survive in mainstream society. If I was semi or quasi, or whatever they wanted to call it, the child psychiatrist at the time, that means I had ability to improve, but my parents were told that I would have no idea how to socialize. Well, that's another story, of course. But that was a big problem for me then. And so we had no help, no support. The only support I ever got from really was from my parents, no, from nobody else. So it really was brutal. Now, today, we're living in a different age. It's almost like me going in a time machine, you know? I was in a different age a few centuries ago when Sib, when they may have had slavery and all the rest. And now that's all abolished. It's the same like autism. It's a different era in my early days, and today it's something else. It's a completely different society of today. So
yeah, I think education is key, isn't it? And the more these things are highlighted, find it interesting that you said autism wasn't really talked about until Rain Man came out. I mean, that's the power of the media and of movies and TV, I suppose. And again, say why your film will be so important. Things like that need to be created, I guess. I mean, I know yours is all done and dusted, and we're going to encourage people to watch that. But do you think it's more difficult now to try and get the media to create, you know, factual stories about the lived experiences of people with autism?
Let's be honest, because when I made this film, or rather developed the concept back in 2015 and 2016, I never thought I would get this far in terms of making the film, getting it finished, facing unbelievable challenges, many of which should have finished the film project off, but didn't, thankfully. But what I would say is, in 2015 till 2019, I noticed there was a distinctive atmosphere where the media wasn't really interested in reflecting the real life situations of autistic people from diverse backgrounds. So whether you're an ethnic minority, whether you're LGBT, whether you're transgender, whether you're religious or non-religious, I've never saw any of those voices on TV like I did with my film. In fact, that's one of the reasons I had to create this film, to show them what was possible. But to my surprise, since 2019, I've had several media appearances online and in articles. So I'm feeling very encouraged about that. So things are definitely changing for the better. I just can't believe it's taken so long to even start the conversation, because at least as a guy who's a young man, it's not always easy to talk about this stuff, because you expect young men to talk about things like relationships or having a nice night out. But how can you have a good time, for example, if venues and community groups or friendship groups aren't really accessible to you? Which is something I'll cover in a future film project, because more and more people are asking me to cover things like relationships and so forth in my next film. And I'm still working on developing the sequel to this film, so it'll be worth a watch.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, well, we'll get you back on when that one's made, Sib, definitely.
Yeah,
I think
thank
we should have a film club and everybody watch it, and then we'll come together and have a discussion about it.
That'd be really
That'd be
awesome.
a really good idea. I just want to, I know we're running out of time, and I just find this so interesting, and I could talk to you all literally all night about this. I did spot one question before my Restream app disappeared, and it was from Gemma, and she's asking about, I think she was asking about the fact that during COVID, the opportunity for diagnosis is seriously decreased. What impact do you think that'll have for this generation, I guess, of children? Although a few people have said in the chat they didn't get diagnosed until they were well into their 20s and 30s. I'll go around and see what answers you've got. Well, Heidi, we'll start with you. Do you think this will have an impact?
I think it definitely will. It was already kind of reaching crisis point before COVID, where I think at one point, I think Durham was about 3 years, whereas I think Stockton, obviously not far away, was 4 to 5 years with waiting times. They did start to, in Durham, get on top of that, where they were able to start condensing all of those appointments into 1 week. Now, in theory, that's a great idea, but the downside is that these poor families have been waiting 2 years to go and see these professionals, and if their child doesn't present the behaviours that they normally see within that short appointment, then that professional doesn't get to see that. And they may miss out on the criteria for a diagnosis, and that kind of just puts them back at the bottom of the waiting list. I think there is massive issues, and I think COVID, of course, like everything, will exaggerate it. And I think now, you know, there's a lot more people. I don't think autism is more prominent like people think it is. I don't think it's just all of a sudden come from everywhere. I think now that awareness is spreading, people are starting to realise, well, actually, I struggled with that as a child, and actually I'm struggling with that now. And those really brave people who were taking the step and going to the doctors, because I think I have heard from a few people who've had a diagnosis as an adult, and when they've gone to the doctors have said, you know, you've managed to make it this far. Well, you know, they've struggled their entire lives, and it's not a case of they've managed to make it this far. They've left them with depression, you know, feeling anxious about everything, not understanding why life is that much harder for them. So I think across the entire age range, there's an issue in diagnosis, and I think it could be. I know when Isaac was being diagnosed, we were quite lucky because we managed to get him in at 2.5. But it took me a long time to call the health visitor out, because I just had this massive parental guilt that it was somehow my fault. And I was one of these really unlucky people in that Isaac's 2-year check didn't happen. So they actually missed that opportunity to be able to spot it. And when I rang, and I said, I'm a bit concerned about my son, the health visitor that picked up, thankfully, wasn't the one I ended up with, but the one that picked up said, can he do this? Can he do this? Can he do this? And I said, oh, no. And she said, oh, well, you've got a problem then, don't you? And put the phone down. And I cried and cried and cried. And I think, you know, it's awful. Every parent I speak to has got a completely different experience, but I do think there needs to be a lot more to do to help diagnose these children. But also, it's all good and well to diagnose them, but if those interventions aren't there at the end of it, then you're just giving the families a leaflet and telling them to go on their way, which isn't productive either. So I think the entire system needs to be relooked at.
Yeah, oh God, I mean, dear me, yeah, you're absolutely right. And thanks to Austin, we now know it's 8 o'clock and we're 9 o'clock and we're going over. But
sorry about that.
That's fine.
There's a grandfather clock in the background. Forgive me.
Lovely. My mama was jealous.
Great.
She's obsessed with grandfather clocks. In terms of COVID, Sib, I'd like to come to you if that's all right. On you know, COVID's been difficult just in general for many people. Do you feel like that it's something, the experience of living through COVID, that will be more difficult for people with autism?
Oh, where
or
do I
will it
begin
be
on this one? Because I live with somebody who has had to shield from the virus. So I spent basically roughly a year indoors and almost never going outside. Whereas before that, I was able to go outside as much as I wanted to see the shops, meet friends, go to events, do everything I liked. And now I'm having to worry about when I can go out again without putting that person at unreasonable risk of catching the virus and possibly not recovering from it. Because I live with people who are quite concerned about this matter, so I've had to deal with other people's worries rather than concentrating on my own plans for getting out of this situation, which is, what do I do when the virus is finally gone, or when everyone gets vaccinated? Because I was dealing with people who are worried about this stuff. So it's very hard on people like me who already have additional needs to focus on having to worry about other people's worries instead of concentrating on your own needs. So it's been very challenging for me. And when I try to tell people this, they can't comprehend it, or they don't believe it's happened, because most people and none of my peers that I know of have ever experienced what I've dealt with during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. It's difficult enough, isn't it? But if you've also got your own worries, and then you have everybody else's worries to consider as well, it's quite heavy going.
Yeah.
Austin, I'd like to come to you just to sort of wrap up on the whole COVID debate. Heidi mentioned there about the support that's not there, and the amount of time you have to wait to get a diagnosis. It sounds to me like this whole socialist government, who would actually fund the NHS and fund these developments a bit more, would be just the thing we need. Do you think additional services would fix the problem, or is it a bigger societal issue that we've got with people not understanding enough, I guess?
Well, these cuts for decades for the NHS service have been abominable and have done enormous damage to the service delivery. And the fact that the staff are not even getting much of a pay rise, that's an utter disgrace as well. And then we can talk about the uncollected taxes, £123 billion, a tax not collected each year. These multinational companies doing tax avoidance, which could solve our country's economy when it could be put into public services. And now is the time during COVID-19. I mean, I work for the Ministry of Justice and the Civil Service. They talk about faceless bureaucrats, all these previous governments, cutting down to size. Now they're crying out for more civil servants. They've been just recruited 20,000 members for the Department of Works and Pensions last year, because unemployment has gone up by 1.25 million. So that is an utter disgrace. So yes, we certainly do need more services. And I was just speaking on autism today at a PCS National Disabled Members event, and the only statistics they did on COVID-19 impacting on neurodivergent people was really just from a few charities, the National Autistic Society. They sent out a questionnaire, a survey, just over 4,000 people, and that's a very low figure. They didn't send it to, there's no records on all the other thousands of people around the country affected who are neurodivergent or autistic, affected by COVID-19. I haven't found any statistics on that at all. So there's a big neglect of autistic and neurodivergent people. I'm sure it's affecting, the waiting list for diagnosis. And of course, the reports that we received from over 4,000 people, it's 9 in 10 autistic people worried about their mental health during lockdown. 85% said their anxiety levels got worse. That's just out of the survey of 4,000. And autistic people were 7 times more likely to be chronically lonely than the general population. 7 in 10 parents said their child has had difficulty understanding or completing schoolwork, and around half said their child's academic progress was suffering. So yes, we have a lot of work to do for a socialist government to put money into public services and support our population, including autistic and neurodivergent people.
But those statistics are stark, aren't they? They're so
Yeah.
high. Yeah, something needs to be done, and I think conversations like this are a start. Obviously, we need to reach bigger and wider audiences and keep having these
Yeah.
conversations and try and move these things along. I suppose I'm going to have to start wrapping up now. I don't really want to, but what I'd like to do, if it's all right with yourselves, is just quickly go around one more time and just let me know, do you have any hopes or visions for the future? Where would you like to see us go? And we'll start with Heidi.
I think my biggest hope for the future is that the prevalence rate for people with autism and learning disabilities is on par with everybody else's, that there isn't such a massive gap, that the healthcare for people with autism and learning disabilities massively improves in accessibility, and that the families that I see, you know, week in, week out, are comfortable enough in society that they know where to go for things like support in education, support in finding jobs, because all of the disabled children that I see will turn into disabled adults. I think there's this misconception that they get to adulthood and it drops away because the services drop away, but actually it's just causing an even bigger problem. So I think I would just like to see more for these families that really do deserve it, and not just the autistic individual themselves, but obviously primarily them, but also the families themselves, because I don't think people realise what these families go through just to support their children, and they do amazing. And honestly, those people are my biggest inspiration, because I see them and they are the kindest, most upbeat people you will ever meet, and they, just like their children, they appreciate the smallest things in life. So I would just like to see things improve for all of them. For people like Austin and Sib, who've had awful experiences, I would like them to get to a stage where they no longer feel like they have to explain themselves and that things are automatically accessible. Because if you make it accessible for an autistic person, it's then accessible for everybody. You're not cutting anybody else out by making it accessible. Everybody else can still access it, but it's then able to be used by all. So that maybe sounds a bit ambitious, but we will get there.
Let's be ambitious. Why not? I think it's absolutely right. It's the least everybody deserves, a fair opportunity, a fair crack at the whip. Yeah, I think that was wonderful. Thanks, Heidi. Sib, can I come to you next? What's your vision and hope? Where do you hope to see us going?
Well, first of all, I hope that I'll be able to make my sequel as planned, because it'll take me to new frontiers across different countries as I campaign for similar changes that I've achieved in the UK. Now, I don't think I got a chance to say much on what the current film has achieved already. And believe me, it's a good list. First of all, when I talk to businesses now, particularly retail and restaurants and so forth, they have become much more aware of people like me with sensory issues. And so now when I come into their shops, they know me a little bit now, and they either turn the music down or they turn it off altogether for as long as I'm in their store. Because what they have discovered, and this is what I discovered as well, but didn't want to say too much at that time, was I end up making more purchases on days when the shops were more accessible to me. Whereas when I went to a normal shop and it was quite loud, I just walked out of the store and not buy anything or talk to the staff. So quite a contrast.
Wow. So being thoughtful of neurodiverse people is also good for the economy.
Yeah, I wish they would see that back in 2015, but they didn't, so I had to make the film. And when I was busy editing a piece of the film in a cafe, someone came up to me who was a staff member, and they were curious about it due to snippets on my laptop then. So I explained to them what was going on, and they took the message on board, because I was asking them to turn the music off because I was struggling to enjoy my coffee because it was too loud. And it worked. It was quickly done.
See, and it's simple changes like that that can make such a difference as well.
It's profound how
really,
quickly I got it done.
Yeah, it's really helpful, and it's simple conversations like this that I think will make all the difference. Once people understand, that's an easy fix, isn't it? Turn the music down. Okay, done. And that makes your day so much easier and so much more enjoyable. Just for that one action. That's brilliant. Austin, if we can finish with you, what is your vision and hope for the future that we can achieve?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Laura, because last year we had high hopes for a socialist opposition, and now we seem to be back to square one. But if I was to shed any light on this, I know people now not believe this at all, but the way the trade unions work with the civil service as their employer is quite a unique relationship compared to private employers. It's quite different altogether. And what they do is they are now learning more about autism, neurodiversity in workplaces in the civil service. They're now promoting the acceptance model as more. And they're listening to me quite a lot from the trade union side, particularly with the Ministry of Justice. I even had a meeting with the Cabinet, even had to go to a session with employees in the Cabinet Office as well. So we are promoting that acceptance, and I'm hoping that we'll have a civil service, once seen as a 19th century institution dealing in 20th century business, that hopefully one day that will be a 21st century institution and will be accountable for all the different types of people who live today in our society. So that should be a start, and how we can broaden out and expand, and how we can also improve relations with the news media. Of course, having the, as we say, the perfect government in power, that's another story. We'll just keep trying. That's all we can do.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, we will always keep trying. That's the name of the game, isn't it? Unfortunately, some days it's harder than others. I just want to say thank you all so much. It has been a real privilege. Thank you for giving us the time to talk to us today. I've learned a lot. I am very aware of my ignorance on many issues, and so this has been really helpful. I hope it's been helpful to other people. We would really like to continue this conversation. You're all more than welcome on any of our shows at any time. We'd love to have you. We are going to have to wrap up. We've gone well over time, but I am not bothered in the slightest because I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been so interesting. We are going to finish tonight with a teaser for Sib's film. The links are in the chat. It is available to buy for the tiny price of $2.99. Come on, you can afford that. Help him out. Help him make his second film. Please watch it. We're going to, as I say, we're going to show you this little clip now. And it just remains for me to say, if you've enjoyed this show, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. All of our things, you know where you can find us now. Websites, YouTube, Twitch. We're all over the place. Become a member. Join the team. It doesn't cost you anything, but you can join in. You can help us create content, give us ideas. It'd be really lovely to grow our team. Thanks again to all of our wonderful guests. We really appreciate you being here. Spread the message. Autism Awareness Week is this week, but don't stop this week. Let's continue this conversation on forever until we have a more understanding society and a socialist government, as Austin said. Thank you very much. We'll leave you with the clip, and we'll just say bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Sib. I have autism, and I'm in Birmingham New Street Station to show everyone what it's like to navigate the station as someone living with autism. Here I get lost in Birmingham as I got my usual route out of the station confused with another location. You won't hear it in the film, but the excessive noise here causes sensory overload, which affects my sense of direction, especially in an unfamiliar area like this one. Thanks to a friend and noise levels dropping, I start to regain my sense of direction. Feels so weird when I got lost. The tram here nearly hits me and the camera operator due to the horrible layout of the footpath here. That's one of the hazards of trams. That was just awful. Now I have to look out for trams, cars, cyclists and people. What I hope to achieve today is to find out what Crewe is like for people with autism, as well as how the wider community in Crewe feels about people with autism in general. I also hope to work with local people to inspire positive change so that the situation for people with autism does improve, and if things are going well, you've got to inspire people to stay on the right course. Meet the British Transport Police in this station. I didn't know everybody here was so friendly and cheerful.
Hi, you okay?
I'm fine, thanks.
PCS Stuart from British Transport Police. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you, mate.
And why are you here today?
First, I'll visit my friend, and secondly, I want to shoot as part of my feature film to raise awareness about autism.
Right.
So I talk to people in Crewe to see what the situation is like, and see what stories they wish to share with me.
Fantastic. Well, have a good day.
Have a nice day, officer.
How was the journey from Wolverhampton to Crewe?
It was quite a great journey, actually.
Was it?
Yeah.
Now, when we was coming out the police station, I thought he was about to get arrested.
Oh, you mean the police officer that spoke to us at the ticket bar when he noticed us filming?
That's correct.
Rest assured, my friends and fans and audience members, the police officer just wanted to share a friendly hello, and we weren't in trouble for any reason.
The red flag.